The answer to October 7th, the real victory for Israel, is normalization with Saudi Arabia. If you do something like that, you show everyone Israel has been able, and the region together have been able to take this tragedy and turn it around to a new reality that is for the benefit of the entire region, and I would say the wider world. That's the victory we can get there.
G'day, humans. Welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas. It is October 7th, 2 years since the Hamas attack on Israel, and many podcasts will be appearing in your feed, revisiting the horrors of that day, talking about the details of the Gaza War, where do we go from here. I wanted instead to ask a dangerous question. Is it possible that the past 2 years of war in Gaza, horrendous as they have been, will ultimately lead to peace in the Middle East? The best person to ask that of is a man who's just written a book about Israel's failures on October 7th and knows the country and its relationship to the rest of the world better than almost anyone. He's the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Before that, he was a military reporter for the Jerusalem Post for more than 10 years. In between, he also served as a senior policy advisor to Naftali Bennett, right-wing Israeli politician. The Jerusalem Post is a centre-right publication, just to give you some context of where Yaakov is coming from. His book is called While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East. And while we begin by talking about the military failures on that dreadful day, what we end with is hopefully, I think, a somewhat optimistic vision of a way in which the lives of Israelis and Palestinians, of Jews and Arabs right across the Middle East, and indeed the diaspora, could be ultimately enhanced by the horrors of the current conflict. Our sympathies go out to all Israelis on this day. Our sympathies go out to all Gazans on this day. Please enjoy the one and only Yaakov Katz. Prior to October 7th, I would have just thought that if there was a breach of the southern border into Israel, that there would be machine guns mounted on turrets that were operated from somewhere else in Israel that would mow down terrorists, and if that failed, there'd be helicopter gunships 5 minutes away that could be scrambled, and they'd just come and blow people from out of the sky. Why weren't there? I mean,
that question is essentially the question that still today, 2 years later, it generates so much mystery, intrigue, and even I'll say, Josh, even conspiracy theories. Like, it doesn't make sense, so when things don't make sense and there's no rational explanation, people have to say there was someone on the inside. Someone shut down the machines or whatever. I mean, there's no evidence to point to that, and I have no reason to believe that was the case. It was something simpler, unfortunately, and more tragic, and that was that we thought that we were impenetrable. We thought that the Gaza border was a barrier that could not be crossed above ground or below ground. We thought that the forces that were deployed along the border could stop any potential invasion that would come because we would have intelligence about it, and we could talk about what was the intelligence going into that morning of October 7th. And we thought that forces could scramble there. But what Hamas did in a sophisticated way, but also in an unsophisticated way, was they learned how we respond and how the military is deployed and what it does in the event of an attack. And what they did very smartly that morning was they fired hundreds, if not thousands, of rockets right away. And what that did is it right away triggered the immediate instinct of all military forces along the border, as well as every Israeli who came in under that rocket fire. You hunker down, you go into your safe space. And under the cover of that rocket fire, very small teams dashed to the border, breached it, broke through, and right away cut communications and the eyes and ears, essentially, of all the forces that were in those frontline positions. And what that did is it created the chaos. And that chaos stayed with the Israeli military for the most part of that day until it was finally able to regain control of the border.
So those initial volleys of rockets, are you suggesting that they were a distraction rather than of much military use?
Oh, 100%. The rockets had no real, they weren't effective. They didn't do anything. They didn't really hit targets. They were meant to achieve one thing and one thing only, and that was to create the chaos and sow the confusion, and it succeeded. If you think about some of those videos that later came out, first of all, you see from the GoPro cameras of Hamas members, those initial teams that dashed to the border, you see them riding on their motorbikes up to the fence with rockets flying over their heads, right? You also see in the videos that came out of some of the frontline IDF positions, one very heartbreaking video is the one from the Nahal Oz outpost, which is where the female spotters, surveillance soldiers were stationed, and they were the ones watching the border, essentially. And you see them enter into an area with concrete slabs on all four sides with a concrete roof. That's the area they're supposed to go into in the event of rocket fire, right? So they understood, they being Hamas, that if they fire a very heavy barrage, it will automatically get everybody to go into the safe zone. They'll be off the cameras. They'll be off those remote control turret guns that you mentioned, and they'll be able to make that mad dash to the border. And by the way, you know, I'll go back, but also fast forward at the same time. At 6:29 in the morning, when that volley of rockets happened, the head of the Shin Bet, the head of the Israel Security Agency, the intelligence agency responsible for Gaza, calls up the chief of staff of the Israeli military and says to him, they're going to be kidnapping people. This is not just any other rocket fire that's coming. That has to do with what happened throughout the night, but that rocket fire was clear already in that initial moment to some of the players involved. This is something much more than just rockets.
Right. And the tragedy that you were talking about with those spotters is that once they were then hiding in those concrete bunkers, which is where you go to protect yourself from the rockets, they were sitting ducks for the fighters who then came in and were able to either take them hostage or execute them all in cold blood. These were 19, 20-year-old girls, many of whom had Palestinian friends. And anyway, but we know that history. I still don't understand, and you were the military reporter for the Jerusalem Post for over a decade, why there wouldn't be a contingency plan in place if this ever happened. Like, you've got a jihadist death cult on your doorstep. You talk a big game about being super sophisticated. When you're a country that wants to be super sophisticated, you clearly are in terms of the pager campaign against Hezbollah or, you know, whatever it might be, or Iron Dome or the strikes on Iran. And setting aside conspiracy theories, because this isn't what I'm pointing at, I'm just literally genuinely a little bit baffled. When you were a military reporter before October 7th and then the editor, were you aware that the southern border was relatively unprotected? Like, were there people in the military who were saying, you know, we should probably have several layers here, not just one?
You know, if I make it personal for a moment, if we had spoken on October 6th, I would have told you everything's okay. And that's the craziness of this reality, is because, and that's often why people have asked me, why do I say we failed? Or, you know, because I really genuinely look at it as a we. It's a national failure on every level. There's the political echelon that failed with the policies. There's the military and intelligence folks. There's the soldiers. But I also think, even as a journalist and someone who, you know, I was in those briefings. I met with the chief of staff of the IDF just a few months before October 7th, where we had a briefing of 3 hours, all the different fronts that Israel faces. Iran, Hezbollah, American, U.S., Israel military alliance, what's going on in the West Bank. And then we kind of get to Gaza, and it's like, yeah, Hamas doesn't want war. They're deterred. They're still getting the cash that they want from the Qataris. Everything's okay, and we got it under control. And it was kind of like, okay, move on to the next thing. That was the perception. So when we think about how this happened, it was really I think you hit the nail on the head. When you live alongside, because that's the fairy tale. We told ourselves a fairy tale that we could somehow live and be neighbors with the genocidal death cult, as you called it. And we could tell ourselves
death cult, but I'm sure Hamas is genocidal as well. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I call it the genocidal death cult. Right? He called it the jihadist. Whatever it is, a death cult. And we could tell ourselves, they don't want to kill us. They just want money. They want, you know, economic prosperity. I mean, think about this for a second.
Go ahead.
Think about this for a second, Josh. And this is, I think, just tells the whole story. If I told you today, we're going to end the war now, and every month we're going to ask the Qataris to transfer $30 million in cash to Hamas to buy us quiet, you would say, Yaakov, you should be institutionalized. That sounds insane. That is what Israeli policy was, and that is what we did for 5 years. 5 years. So I mean, and now we look back and we say, how did we ever believe that that was possible? And let me again.
But even if it was possible, you still want a contingency. This is what's so crazy about it to me. Like, if New Zealand tried to invade Australia, Australia would be prepared, and they're our closest ally. If Canada tried to invade the United States, they would not be able to do it, just because you take precautions, right? I mean, and these are the closest allies in the world.
You're right. And you had 3 layers that were meant to prevent this from happening. Layer number 1 is intelligence. We know that throughout the night between October 6th and October 7th, and we go into great detail in the book, my co-author, my good friend Amir, and I, detailing what happened, what alarm bells were going off. There was the SIM card. Suddenly 100 Israeli SIM cards go live in Gaza, either meaning that there's 100 Israelis in Gaza or that Palestinians have switched their SIM cards. And the only reason they would do that is because they want to come into Israel and they want to still have communications. You had evidence and visual intelligence of them uncovering rocket launchers. You saw them preparing underground bunkers for their top commanders. All of that was known, and there were debates all throughout the night. Is this a drill? Is this an attack? That was failure 1, the misunderstanding of the intelligence, thinking more leaning towards a drill as opposed to an attack. Failure 2, the barrier. This is supposed to be the most sophisticated barrier in the world, makes the DMZ between South and North Korea look like a playground. This has multi-layers.
Obviously not.
Oh, obviously not. Electronic fence. By the way, go back to 2014 when Hamas starts popping out of tunnels inside Israel. Israel says, okay, we got to deal with this. They dig an underground wall and they build a wall down to the aquifer. Then they create a system to detect tunnels when they're being dug, where they're being dug, and even how they're being dug. You know how many people crossed into Israel on October 7th in the tunnel? 0. So we thought we had a barrier that no one could cross. That was a fairy tale too. And then
they blew up the barrier just by blowing it up with bombs?
They under the cover of the rockets, they dashed to the border, they blew holes in the border, they got through, they cut the communications, they cut the cables, they cut everything, and then we didn't see, and then they made even bigger holes. At the end of the day, 60 plus different entry points along the barrier on that day. But 3, the third line of defense, are the soldiers who are there. I mean, this isn't, Israel's not like, we know Hamas is there. We fought rounds of violence. We fought wars with Hamas every 2 years, pretty much, since we pulled out of Gaza in 2005. Our head is not buried in the sand. We know that we have an enemy there, but we thought that the soldiers there were enough to stop and repel an attack. They were enough to repel a small attack, not when you have thousands of people who are crossing the border. All those 3 collapsed immediately in that morning. And so it wasn't that there wasn't a contingency plan. It was that all the layers of defense collapsed. And then the contingency plan, which is, like you said, send the gunships, put 2 Apache helicopters above the border and just mow down anyone who tries to cross in. I mean, shouldn't that be simple? And we're talking to pilots who that morning are scrambled to their squadrons. And where are they being sent? When I heard this for the first time, blew my mind. They're being sent off to the Mediterranean to protect our gas rigs, some of them, because they thought that, if there's rockets, they might be fired also at the gas rigs, which is a strategic asset, 100%. You need to put them on the border. And there was just complete chaos, confusion, and blindness.
What do you make of the criticism that too many of Israel's military assets were focused on Lebanon, Hezbollah, the West Bank, policing settlements, and so on, and that distracted Israel from the real game?
I mean, listen, Hezbollah was always up until October 7th was the primary strategic threat, was the threat that Israel perceived. If you look at the borders, at least, obviously Iran on the horizon, but if you look at our border threats, Hezbollah was perceived to be the much bigger one. But there's no question that we were also allocating as a military a lot of our assets and soldiers and battalions to the West Bank to police things that were happening there. Was it a distraction? I don't think it was more of a distraction than the usual. There were some claims that there was a certain member of the Knesset of the Israeli parliament who was set up an illegal outpost in the West Bank. And as a result, Israel had to shift resources from the Gaza border to the West Bank. It was very minimal in the terms of allocation. That wasn't what changed the equation or the dynamic of what was happening that morning.
And yet the government that presided over that is still in power, and the Prime Minister is still in power, and whatever calls there have been for accountability have presumably gone nowhere. How do you pull off that move of political jiu-jitsu?
It really is one of...
You'd be called Bibi Netanyahu, I suppose.
If you are Bibi Netanyahu, apparently you can pull off the impossible. I mean, listen, this is really, in my opinion, the most disturbing element of what's happened. I mean, 1,200 people massacred on a single day, the most Jews killed on a single day since the Holocaust, right? Israel as a country established to prevent the Holocaust from happening, right? And the government that was in power, the government that presided over this, the government that set the policies that led to it, the government that ripped the country apart in the year preceding with the judicial reform, which saw hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets and really an unprecedented division within Israeli society. How is this government still in power? Where is the accountability? And by the way, when you look at what happened in the military and in the Shin Bet, they've all been purged. All those top guys are gone. The chief of staff, the head of the Shin Bet, the deputy chief of staff, the head of the Southern Command, the head of intelligence, gone. But in the military, not in the government, not a single minister has resigned.
Which is ridiculous because we live, Israel's a democracy where the military is under civilian control. So ultimately the buck stops with the executive, not with generals.
You would think. And by the way, if you go back in time and listen to Benjamin Netanyahu's own speeches in the aftermath of the Second Lebanon War in 2006, when he was in the opposition and Ehud Olmert was then the prime minister, a war that was 34 days, not 2 years, a war that cost, I think, 220 soldiers around and not 900 plus soldiers, not to mention the 1,200 killed on October 7th. He demanded that he step down. I mean, the hypocrisy just screams to the heavens, but the accountability here, we have a serious flaw in our country. And it pains me greatly. We don't, Josh, there's not even a word. People often don't know this. There's not a word for accountability in Hebrew. Seriously, there's no word for accountability in Hebrew, and we don't even, you don't even
don't
have
let
a way
the anti-Semites find that out. There'll be a lot of Candace Owens, videos about how Jews don't understand accountability. Yeah, Jews are just slithery. They always want to weasel out of everything.
Exactly. No, but it's disturbing, and the fact that 2 years into this, we still don't have a commission of inquiry. The book, I think the book is good. We wrote the book out of a real sense of urgency and a need to try to understand and figure out what happened, mostly because we wanted to know what happened, but also because we genuinely believe that you need to prevent the next time, you need to learn what happened. But the fact that the government hasn't established a commission of inquiry 2 years into this, the greatest disaster since we were established as a state, I mean, is absurd.
And can the opposition not force that? Like, does Israel have an equivalent of what we would have in Australia or the UK, which would be called a Royal Commission, or in the United States, like something like the 9/11 Commission
of Inquiry?
Right, and can Parliament not force that on the Prime Minister, or do they just not have the numbers, or what?
You need the numbers, and they don't have the numbers. Exactly.
Amazing.
You have to remember one of the problems with these. Well, it's not. This is the Israeli system. You basically have a 120 seat parliament, right? You have 10 seats that are always going to be Arab seats, and then the rest split up between right and left. So you have essentially, the moment that you have the majority on the right, it's pretty much game over. The Arabs will never really go with the right, but right now you have a situation that the Benjamin Netanyahu's majority is 65, 66 or something like that against. And by the way, there's no interest in anyone who's in the government to establish a commission of inquiry.
Of course not.
Right? So,
just to clarify, pardon my ignorance, but is it a single chamber Knesset? Is there an upper house?
Single chamber.
Okay, so there's not even a Senate that can do an inquiry, whereas here or in the States we would have that.
What we have to wait for, I think, is, unfortunately, we'll have to wait for when there will be an election, hope and pray that there will be a new government that will be elected, and that this government will do right with the Israeli people. And by the way, I think about my children and one day, hopefully my grandchildren. I mean, it's about them. It's about the future generations of this country. We need to learn what happened so it doesn't happen again.
You mentioned the hypocrisy being staggering. The other glaring hypocrisy that people around the world have felt increasingly over the past 2 years is the pain and suffering of October 7th. being used as a justification for what's going on in Gaza still to this day. And let's ignore for a moment the types of people who were protesting in the streets on October 8th before Israel had even done anything, condemning Israel and implicitly sort of siding with the terrorists. Just talking about people like myself who, Jews around the world, secular people in Western countries who are instinctively inclined to be sympathetic towards Israel, who have been bashed and beaten into eating their words over the past 2 years because of the intensity of the campaign. What is the mood currently, if it's possible to summarize, in Israel about the duration and death toll of this war?
You might not like my answer, but and I'm not sure that many people like my answer, but here it is. First of all, the mood here is that this war has gone on for too long, and Israelis, by the vast majority, want this war to be over. We're recording this after. Just a few days after Donald Trump, had rolled out his plan to potentially end the war. We're still waiting to see what's going to happen. But the vast majority
Tony Blair's going to swoop in and save the day because he's got such a great track record of leaving a sterling reputation.
And also,
in the Middle East.
Just on Tony Blair, why do you want to get involved in something?
I know. He's going to be the emir of Gaza for the next 5 years. I don't
think you could pay me enough for that. But anyhow, the vast majority of Israelis would say, grab this plan. Let's just get this war over with already. Bring us back the hostages, even if it means that Hamas remains somehow in power in Gaza. We want this over. But the other side is that, and this I think you might not like, is that Israelis, for the most part, they don't see the images that you're seeing. They don't see what you're watching in Australia. They don't see what people are watching in the United States or in the UK or anywhere else in the world. We don't see the destruction and devastation in the same way because Israelis are still very much focused. And we could say this is a flaw or I just will describe the reality as I see it. Israelis are very much focused still on their pain and their suffering. And just as an illustration, I could talk about my own family. I got 4 kids, 22 down to 13. They are the number of people they know who have been killed in this war is astonishing. My 2 older daughters from their youth group, a number. At least I can count on 2 hands the number of people that they know, funerals that they've been to. My younger daughter.
You're talking about soldiers in the war, or you're talking about
soldiers
civilians on October 7th?
Yeah, soldiers and civilians. The people that they know who, teachers, husbands of teachers, a rabbi from my son's school, 2 hostages that we knew on day one, just from our own circles, right? And we're just one family. This is every Israeli family. So the story of October 7th still for Israelis is very raw and very real. And that trauma still lives as long as the hostages are in Gaza. And therefore, it's difficult. Now, does it make it right or wrong? I think it's wrong. For example, I think that we should be more aware of what's happening in Gaza. I think we need to, because even if we're right, and we could talk about whether we're right in the way we're fighting, we're wrong in the way we're fighting, that's a separate conversation. But even if we are right, we have to recognize the tragedy and the suffering on the other side, because we need to know the full dimensions of what conflict leads to. So we're right. And I think, for example, we were definitely right to respond the way we did. I think we're right in the way we're fighting. I think that for the most part, the tragedy of Gaza is the responsibility and the blame of Hamas. But we should also know that this is how the world perceives us. This is what's happening around the world. This is what's happening in Gaza. And it should be another one of those considerations that we take into account as a people when we try to hold our government accountable and consider whether they're making the right decisions in prolonging the war.
And when you say you think we're right, I was having dinner with a friend of mine the other night and October 7th came up and he said, he's not Jewish. He just said, yeah, October 7th was terrible and I'm sure that lots of Israelis are really hurt by it. And because I was saying, there's not a person in Israel who's not touched by this. And he said, but every day is October 7th in Gaza. Is there a person in Gaza who's not touched by this?
So I don't think every day in Gaza is October 7th. I think every day in Gaza is a war, and it's the war that was brought on by the attack on October 7th. I think we have to break down for a moment what's happening, right? And I'll say that the current operation in Gaza, which is controversial, the one that's going on as we speak in Gaza City, is controversial because we have disagreements within our own government. The military echelon, and it's no secret, has said, look, we don't need this operation. Hamas is already degraded. It's already been beaten militarily. Why are we going into Gaza? The government will tell you that we need this for military pressure on Hamas, because without military pressure, there's no chance that Hamas agrees to end the war and release the hostages. But we have to remember what Hamas did. And I'm not talking about October 7th. I mean, that was the attack that triggered the war. Hamas built in Gaza a network of tunnels that was the New York subway and the London Underground put together under all of the buildings, all of the hospitals, all of the schools, all of the mosques, you name it. Now, we have a situation that when someone is firing a rocket from the third floor of an apartment building, or the second floor of a hospital, or from the schoolyard of a UN school, you have to ask yourself a question: can you attack that or can you not? Right now, there's rules of war here, right? Is it a civilian target becomes a military target? That's clear. But then you get into questions of proportion, right? Okay, you can attack it, but if you're going to kill one bad guy and kill 100 civilians, is that proportional or is that not? Or is that the answer? Now, there's no scientific answer here. And this is where things get foggy. What I look at the end is I look at how Hamas created this, how any country needs to be able to act in self-defense, how it's a tragedy, how Israel has invested great resources in leaflets, in robocalls to cell phones, in calling up buildings and the residents and saying, leave those buildings before we attack. Unprecedented in military conflict. But I also look at one other thing. And sorry to drag on, but I just think this is important. If we take the Hamas number, right, we're used to hearing in the media something called the Gaza Health Ministry. It's essentially the Hamas Health Ministry. And I think, Josh, you know that no media in the world would ever quote the Al-Qaeda Health Ministry or the ISIS Health Ministry. But I say, put that aside.
Maybe Al Jazeera of an occasion.
Maybe Al Jazeera, right. We'll give them that. I say, forget that for a moment. I'll take their number. They say it's about 63,000 right now, people who have been killed. And we know, I mean, listen, many, many, many women, children, men have been killed in this war. Innocent civilians have been killed. But if I take their number, and again, there's no reason for me to believe a terrorist organization like Hamas, but I say take it. I want to also take the Israeli number. And the Israeli number is that 20,000, because they don't distinguish between combatants and civilians. 20,000 are
Hamas
combatants.
don't.
Correct. The Gaza Health Ministry, Hamas doesn't. But Israel says out of the 60,000, 20,000 about are bad guys. These are the terrorists. Now, every war has what's called a combatant-civilian ratio. And I don't want to sound cold and as if, just make this numbers, but that's what we have to talk about. And again, every loss of civilian life is a tragedy. But if you look at the combatant-civilian ratio in this war, what we're looking at is for every combatant, and this is in every war, for every combatant, how many civilians are killed? So we have one combatant, 3. Okay, in the worst case, we're talking about 3. So that means that Israel, for every combatant killed, either 2 or 3 civilians are being killed. Now go ask the United Nations. What happened in wars that Australia has participated in Afghanistan and Iraq, NATO wars, right? Wars that, of course, America has led. I'm not even going back to World War II, which is, of course, absurd what happened there in the numbers. We're talking about an average of 1 to 6 and sometimes 1 to 9 when we get into urban settings. Gaza is the most densely urban populated area in the world. Now, does Israel make mistakes? 100%. Is every strike clean and precise and accurate and done the right way? No, because this is war. It sucks. But when I look at those numbers, I say to myself, 1 second, not only is this not genocide, not only is this not, intentional to kill civilians, this is probably one of the most accurate, precise conflicts fought in the last 100 years, right? So if we even want to talk about the numbers, and again, it makes it sound very cold-hearted, but this is actually probably the best ever that we've seen in military conflict.
I mean, I'm fine with cold numbers. I think it's only rational to talk about cold numbers. I think the problem that people have is that there's a context that seems to be being elided in the talk about cold numbers, which is what is the outcome of the war? Like, what is you want to have a justification as to why it's necessary to kill this bad guy and these, non-combatants, these civilians as collateral damage in order to achieve X, right? Like defeating the Nazis, good thing. Get rid of all the Nazis. We'll do what we have to do. There should be no more Nazis in the world. People are skeptical that it's possible for the current campaign to get rid of jihadists. It might get rid of, it's gotten rid of tons and tons of Hamas operatives, formal people who, had signed up to Hamas. But as you said, even the military was against going into Gaza City. And yet a political system where there are all kinds of incentives for the people in power to perpetuate the conflict so they don't lose their coalition and have to face an election and maybe get sent to jail on corruption charges or whatever it might be, that conspires to perpetuate a conflict. And it's just a bit galling. It's a little bit hard to swallow that even if we're Pollyanna about the combatant to civilian ratio, we're talking about highly dangerous, reckless behavior in a very urban area with a long, just to throw in another wrench in the works, which is the complicated and tangled moral history of Israel's relationship with the occupied territories, right? So it's not like, I sometimes hear Israeli government officials or pro-Israel voices say, well, if any country was invaded by another country, they would respond in the same way. And the problem with that, the way it lands to a non-Israeli ear is like, Gaza was sort of another country, but also Gaza and the West Bank are territories that Israel has been involved in the creation of and has participated in questionable ways, many would argue, in terms of the way that the blockade on Gaza was conducted and the way that the settlements are built in the West Bank and the militarization of the West Bank, and we go on forever. It's not as if
we could sit here for 3 hours now.
Yeah, it's you know what I mean. It's not like we were just sitting in Israel doing our thing. We had nothing to do with the Gazans. They were totally free to do whatever they want. Subsisting on the calories that we gave them, unable to leave their enclave, for good reasons. Don't get me wrong. Like if I had a terrorist state next door, I wouldn't think everything's peachy either. But it troubles me that Israel has found itself in this kind of complicated moral thicket where it's not quite as simple as the rational calculus you made. Not because there's something unseemly about being overly rational about civilian deaths, but because that's not the only piece of the jigsaw puzzle.
I'll tell you, listen, we're not going to prosecute this 78 years of Israel's existence.
Well, we've got an hour and a half, Yaakov. Come on, surely we can wrap it up.
1967, no, but look, Israel, and I think if we just jump to more modern history, in 2005, when Israel pulled out of Gaza, right, you're 100% right. I mean, there was the constant dynamic of a blockade and another war, and can they leave? Can they not leave? And what, the Egyptians have a border, but they're not letting in. So Israel takes responsibility. Very complicated. Even after Israel pulled out of Gaza, it still held those relations and those ties that it was in control of the Gaza Strip, essentially, and what could go in and what could come out. And therefore, you're right that it's not as if this happened in a vacuum. With that said, what I want to just add, and I think, this is maybe the answer to your question. I 100% agree, and this is my biggest criticism of the way the war has been managed, is that Israel, you're right that when you go to war, or when you're pulled into war, like in this case, you need to, it was Clausewitz, the famous Prussian military theorist who a couple hundred years ago said, listen, military operations or war is essentially a means to a political resolution, right? Now, Israel from the beginning of this war said, look, we're coming to eliminate Hamas. Total victory. That was the slogan that the prime minister was talking about all the time. He even printed baseball hats with total victory on them, right? And everyone said, and I was watching this from the beginning, I'm like, what does that mean, total victory? What is total victory? Because we're not going to kill every last Hamas member. We're not going to round up every last AK-47. And even 2 years into this, out of the hundreds of miles of tunnels, we've only destroyed maybe 60% of them, right? So, I mean, there's still a ton more to do. So what is total victory? Forever war? I mean, I don't know how we get there. There's an obvious answer. And I think the Donald Trump plan touches on that, is the removal of Hamas from power, the degrading of it as a military force, so it can no longer threaten you, and creating an alternative governing entity in Gaza that can achieve 3 goals. 1, rebuild Gaza, right? Rehabilitate the place. That's very much needed. 2, prevent Hamas from reconstituting, has to have a robust capability of military, police, whatever you want to call it, to prevent Hamas from being able to reconstitute. Of course, Israel will have to retain some sort of operational freedom to ensure its security, but you need people on the ground to stop the Hamas guys. Number 3 is also take Gaza on a journey of de-radicalization, whole other huge piece of the puzzle. But the fact is that Israel never articulated this, never said this. And I think that we caused ourselves huge, irreparable damage in the world. Because I don't think that had we said from the beginning, listen, we're fighting this war because we want to help facilitate the creation of a new entity, remove Hamas. I don't think all the anti-Semites wouldn't have become anti-Semites. I don't think all the criticism would have gone away. But I think that people like your friend, maybe, who's probably an intelligent guy, and you're right, is sympathetic overall. I think most of those people would have said, okay, at least I understand what Israel's fighting for. But instead, what we have is no articulation of what the day after looks like. Well, I correct myself. We do have an articulation. We have crazy far-right ministers in our
I was going to
government.
say that. The other thing is that the rest of the world doesn't know how to contextualize.
Exactly. You got these guys who say we're going to resettle
you've got Smotrich
Gaza.
and Ben Gvir being what is perceived as being the people who say the quiet part out loud. The only people in Israel who actually say what all Israelis are secretly thinking, which is that the Palestinians are fucked and they should go away and we should wash our hands of them and we don't give a shit about them, really. Like, that's the sense that people get from the world. One thing I've never heard since October 7th from any Israeli government official is the word liberation, or to liberate Palestinians from jihadists. Why wasn't it framed like that? Why not frame it as, here are these poor people, they're trapped, they are basically hostages themselves, it's time to free them? Never happened. Never heard it.
This kills me. I can't tell you enough how much it frustrates me, because, and I've said this to the government officials, I've probably done just personally hundreds, maybe 400 upwards of interviews with CNN and Sky and BBC, trying to explain. And you always have the Smotrich remark or the Ben Gvir remark or some other idiot minister who says, let's drop a nuclear weapon on Gaza. And you're like, I didn't even know we had nuclear weapons because we've never said we did. I mean, what is wrong with these people? But they're, besides for being stupid, they also cause great damage to the country. And look, the fact is, what they say is not policy, but when you allow a vacuum, the vacuum's going to be filled. And I think that's on Netanyahu for not working to prevent this from happening. He could have said early on, our aim is X, Y, Z, and that's what we're doing. And it would have shut those people up. And back to what you said before, you're right. This is where his political considerations came into play. He didn't want to go up against Smotrich and Ben Gvir because he knew if he did, they would pull out of his coalition, and he wanted to stay in power. So I think that when we look at the war, I don't think that the operations on the ground is the save my political ass. I think that it was not stopping Ben Gvir and Smotrich from talking and not putting them in their place. That was the part that was about political survival.
Right. So when you talk about the day after, right, the way, one of the major impediments to being able to reconstitute Gaza and have some kind of interim authority and have Hamas lay down its weapons is the hostages, is the fact that there are still Israelis there. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I think other people share the sensibility. I don't quite get the hostage fixation in Israel.
What do you mean?
Well, of course it's tragic that there's a few dozen people, and originally over 100 people, in horrible conditions. But if they'd been killed on October 7th, then
the war would have been over a long time.
The war would have been over, presumably. Why is it okay? There are casualties, like Israelis seem okay with their soldiers dying to continue the war. They seem okay with tens of thousands of Gazans dying because there are 46 people or something in a tunnel, 48 emaciated. Like, I get it. Emotionally, from what you were saying about how traumatizing October 7th was. But another part of me feels like after October 7th, wouldn't a smart thing to do on the part of Israel to have been like, this whole hostage-taking bullshit that you jihadists are always doing, it's not going to work anymore. You're never going to do it anymore. We don't give a shit about the hostages. Like, this is it. You're not going to have us over a barrel ever again. Fuck the hostages and fuck you, Hamas, and we're going to flood the tunnels. Like, get the women and children out. We'll put them all in Sinai. All the military-aged males can come out and we can do a background check on you. And if you're still in Gaza in a week, we'll flood the tunnels and be done with it, and everything's over in 2 weeks. Or whatever. You know, it seems like the way the hostages loom. I was in Israel in November. Bring them home, everywhere. All posters everywhere, all throughout Jaffa. Explain it to me.
It's a tough one. I mean, on a rational level, what you just said, I can't say I disagree with. To some extent, you have to ask yourself, especially where we are now, where we started this war with 251 hostages who were taken to Gaza, and we're currently at 48. And out of the 48 that are in Gaza, we know that maybe 20 are alive, right? So you want to tell me that the war is continuing for maybe 20 people who are alive when you've lost already, just in the last few months, probably about 20 soldiers have been killed in Gaza. So like, what is we're not even talking about the people who are being killed in Gaza, the Palestinian civilians who are being killed. So how does this equation work? And you're also right, 100%, 1,000,000% that we keep on digging this hole for ourselves, right? Back in 2006, Hamas comes into Israel in a tunnel, attacks a tank, kidnaps a soldier by the name of Gilad Shalit, one soldier, holds on to him for 5 years. And in 2011, Benjamin Netanyahu, then he was prime minister, releases over 1,000 Palestinians in exchange for this one soldier. By the way, including among those 1,000 is Yahya Sinwar, the genocidal terrorist who plotted, and ran the October 7th massacre, right? He's the one who released him from Israeli prison. The guy was supposed to sit there and rot away for eternity. So, I mean,
yeah, for what the hell are we doing? For one person. And Yahya Sinwar went on and killed 1,200 people.
Right. Because of one soldier. There's something, I want to say there's something wrong, but it's a strength and a weakness at the same time. That's what we have to recognize. The weakness is, look at what we do for one person. Look at what we're doing for 48 people, 28 of them known to be verified bodies. Look at a war that proceeds. I mean, because in a dry, rational reality, you say, I've achieved my war aims. I'm stopping the war. I'm letting in the new governing entity. Let's get going. We'll try to get back who we can get back in the future. Let's go. We're going to run negotiations, but we got to get moving, right? That's in the dry vacuum world. Within Israel, though, there's something about this country and the ethos. And I think it has to do with a number of factors. I don't have the perfect answer, but I think it has to do with the fact that we have a compulsory military service. Everybody serves. So when you have
except for the ultra-Orthodox, but
the people who do serve, and that's the majority of this country. When you see soldiers who are taken, you look at them like they're your son or your daughter. When you see civilians who are taken, you feel like it's you. And the abandonment, the responsibility to bring them back, and where we go to save one life is something that no other country does. Nobody does this. So but
it feels ethnocentric to non-Israelis and to non-Jews because, you hear Palestinians talk about bringing back the hostages. I've seen lots of posts on social media every time something blows up about Netanyahu getting up at the UN or whatever and talking about the hostages, referring to the Palestinians who are in Israeli prisons in military tribunals that they've never faced they've never had a proper trial. They've never had they're suspected associates of terrorist organizations or something, but many of them might be civil dissenters or whatever. They've never faced their day in court, and these people call those people hostages. So yeah, it's a laudable sense of empathy that Israelis are displaying towards their own kind, but most of the world looks at that and goes, well, it'd be nice if you could expand that empathic circle to the people who you're also detaining in military prisons and the people being blown up in Gaza.
I'll push back on that because I think that, from what I know, the military tribunals actually do follow procedures and there's an appeal system that allows them to appeal to civilian court. But I put that
most
aside.
Human rights organizations don't regard them as being fair courts.
Most human rights organizations don't actually judge Israel in a fair, objective way.
This is
either.
true.
But right, but I mean, nothing's ever black and white. That I totally recognize, and I think that here, first of all, we do have to care about ourselves. There's no one else who's going to care about us. I mean, we see what goes on in the world. We see what happens and the hatred of Israel. I mean, you mentioned October 8th when the protest began. Protests began in New York City on October 7th, right? As Israel was under attack. Israel hadn't even fired a shot yet back into Gaza. And we were already protests and demonstrations around the world. You know, people smelled Jewish blood and the anti-Semites said, okay, let's jump into the party.
Don't worry, it was happening just as promptly in Australia, but the international dateline impeded our jihadists and Islamists from getting quick enough.
So for you, it was October.
It was already the 8th by the time it happened.
Exactly. But I do think is that, you know, we of course will first and foremost prioritize ourselves. But I'll borrow a line also from Golda Meir, our former prime minister back in the 70s, is that if they cared about their children as much as we cared about their children, there would not be war here. And I think that still is very true. I mean, the way that the Israeli military, for the most part, fights, and I know that's difficult to see and to understand and, you know, to accept what I'm saying, looking at what's happened in Gaza. But you don't put a base inside a building and you don't hide rockets in a children's bedroom under their bed. You don't fight in that way if you care about their lives. Hamas's purpose, Hamas looks at the civilians of Gaza as the fodder that they want to be killed by the cannons because they want this to happen to Israel. They are very sophisticated. And this is another tragic mistake that Israel made, I think, that it did not recognize that what happens and that the way it responds and when it kills these people, what essentially it's doing is playing right into Hamas's hands. Because I'll say one other thing, Josh, right? Imagine we're Hamas right now, you and I. I'm in Doha and you're in Gaza, or vice versa. We're the Hamas leaders. We're sitting on a Zoom
I'll take
call.
Doha, please. You can have fucking Gaza.
Yeah. And we're plotting. What do we do? Do we end the war? Do we accept Trump's plan? Do we not? And, you know, I would say to you, hold on a second. Let's look at the reality. We still got 48 hostages. We got Israel bogged down in Gaza. They don't have a way out. We're getting the world, including Australia, Canada, France, Britain, other countries, recognizing a Palestinian state for the first time in history, right? Even after October 7th, even though we're holding on to hostages. Israel is ostracized, isolated. The whole world thinks they're committing genocide. You got ICC warrants. Out of the 4 that were issued in the middle of the war, only 2 are left because 2 were against the Hamas guys who have been killed. So Benjamin Netanyahu still has an ICC warrant. And when he flew now to New York for the General Assembly of the United Nations, he couldn't fly over France, right? Because he was afraid if he's got an emergency landing in France, maybe they'll arrest him because they're signatories of the Rome Statute of the ICC.
Or you can send up fighter jets if there's a plane flying over your territory and you can force it down. You can do those little wing waves that the fighter jets do and force it to land. Yeah.
They had to fly around France, which has made the trip longer by, I don't know, an hour or 2. I mean,
and France is a friend of Israel. Macron
but here's the question. Yeah. Are we winning or losing the war? And I would think there's an argument to be made that Hamas might think, even with the 60,000 people killed, they're winning the war because it's achieving their goals. So we actually, as the Western world, have to ask ourselves a different question. I think, at least. Are we not misunderstanding the dynamic here of what Hamas is really after? And are we not essentially rewarding Hamas and making it believe that they, in fact, have succeeded in their ultimate objective?
You're preempting where I was going to take this conversation, so let's just go there now, which was going to be, what do you think Yahya Sinwar wanted on October 7th? What was his wet dream outcome?
Well, I think partially of what's happening right now, but I think more important, he wanted to achieve 2 very clear objectives. Well, 3, let's say. The first is, look, these guys never need a good reason to want to kill Israelis, kidnap Israelis. I mean, that's just, they wake up in the morning.
Sure, but he's strategic. He's not just he's not a foot soldier.
100%. The 2 strategic objectives was, 1, let's remember where we were back in October 2023. There was a plan on the table, ready to be signed, by the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel for Saudi normalization. It would not have been an expansion of the Abraham Accords, which was the normalization agreement between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco back in 2020. It would have been a whole new agreement that would literally open up the door for normalization and diplomatic relations between Israel and the entire Muslim world. Because once you get the Saudis, you get potentially Indonesia, Malaysia, everyone, right? Africa. It's a whole new reality.
Yes, once you've got the imprimatur of the most important Arab Muslim country, then the other dominoes will fall.
So that was about to happen. He wanted to prevent that from happening, and he succeeded. The second thing that I think was most strategic is he recognized the Palestinian issue, and particularly Gaza. No one gives a shit. They've fallen off the world's agenda. No one cares. No one's talking about them. He wanted to bring that back. And if you think about that, everywhere we go today, everywhere you travel in the world, every capital, you go throughout Sydney, you go to Melbourne, you go to Canberra, you go all throughout Europe. I was with my family in Italy over the summer. You get free Palestine, Palestinian flags, free Gaza. Everyone in the world, this issue now has become the modern, free Nelson Mandela, right? I mean, this is what it is. So from that perspective, the future of Palestine, the future of Gaza, the Palestinian issue is today, who cares about Ukraine, right? I mean, this is the number one issue for the world, and definitely for the younger generations of this world. There he succeeded. So I think when you look at those strategic objectives, right, he definitely met those two. I think, to try to destroy Israel, if he ever thought he potentially could, that he failed miserably. And when you look at the...
Sorry to break some bad news to you, Yaakov. I think there was a third strategic. I think those are really interesting points, but I think there was a third piece of the puzzle, possibly, which I worry about more than any other, which is to bait Israel into behaving in such unconscionable ways that diaspora Jews around the world themselves were both victims of more anti-Semitism and found themselves uneasy about supporting Israel. What has happened to my relationship to Israel and of many other diaspora Jews over the past 2 years is, unfortunately, I think, exactly what Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran want, which is that Israel turn into a little Sparta, sure, to borrow Netanyahu's words. Yeah, a pariah state that no longer even has buy-in from the Jews of the world, because I've been misunderstood sometimes in my commentary on Israel, because people think that when I say that Jews should stop defending Israel, people think I mean that Jews in Israel should stop defending their state, or that Israelis don't belong in Israel, or that Zionism is wrong, or that Jews don't have a right to a state. I don't think any of those things. But I do think that the time has come for us to acknowledge the richness of the tradition of Judaism as an ethnicity and a culture and a faith that is independent of carrying water for the state of Israel. And that's not a position I was at on October 6th, 2023. And that is a huge victory. And Bibi has done Sinwar's bidding 1,000% on bringing that about.
Trust me, what you're saying right now deeply, deeply disturbs me. And I think it needs to disturb every Israeli. I think that Israelis are not aware enough of that sentiment that you are articulating very eloquently, and very painful for me as an Israeli Jew, definitely, to hear that, who cares deeply about the relationship between Israel and the diaspora, because I recognize, at least I believe, that we are one people. That I recognize there is a sense of peoplehood, whether you're a Jew who lives in the land of Israel, or you're a Jew who lives in Australia or somewhere else around the world. And I want to keep that sense of peoplehood vibrant and alive. And I want Israel, in an ideal way, to play a role in the Jewish identity of people around the world, even if they don't live here. That's fine. And I think that Israel today plays the opposite role. And I think you're 100% right. And I think that the government doesn't take that enough into consideration. I don't think, though, by the way, and you'll probably agree, I think you'll agree with me, is that at the end of the day, on October 7th, right, or October 8th, the cabinet meets, or even half a year into the war, the cabinet convenes. And we say, listen, do we keep going? And then somebody raises their hand in the cabinet meeting and says, listen, look what's going on in Columbia. Look what's going on in the University of Sydney. Look what's going on in all these college campuses. look at the anti-Semitism. I mean, we're talking after the horrific attack in Manchester on Yom Kippur, where 2 Jews were killed and several others seriously wounded. I mean, anti-Semitism is thriving, right? Hundreds of percentile increase. Maybe we should consider not escalating the war because of the impact it's having around the world on Jewish communities. Should that be a factor in the government's debates? 100%, in my opinion. Is it today? No. Should it be? Yes. But should it be the determining factor? Also no, because this government is going to have to determine what's right for the citizens of this country. But I think that we come back to something that we kind of touched upon earlier, which is that we're not explaining what we're doing. This government is not articulating anything. It's not giving anyone hope. It's not giving anyone a vision. And it's turning who are our natural allies like yourself. I mean, people who are Jewish, who are supporters of Israel, even non-Jews who are supporters of Israel. And it's saying to them, we don't give a shit. And that's that hunkering down. I'll just say one other thing about that's not who we are as a country. That's not Israel. Israel is a Western nation, right? This is, by the way, you mentioned Bibi's Sparta comment, the super Sparta comment. I think what was so horrific to hear, right, and why it was so painful and people were so angry.
Just for background, if people didn't hear it, he was talking to the UN, is that right? And
no, he was a speech here in Israel that he gave.
Oh, okay. And he was basically saying, even if we lose all our friends in Europe and the United States, hey, Sparta was able to do it. We'll be a super Sparta and we won't need any friends because we'll be so tough.
Right. And it was, he was talking mostly about the economy and how we can do things on our own. We don't need ties around the world. And people were like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? I mean, Israel is a Western country. Our cultural ties are with the West. Right, it's with Europe and the United States. Our trade is our biggest trading partner is the EU.
We're certainly not trading with Syria.
Yeah, no, we don't watch Indian films, Bollywood. We watch, American Hollywood movies and TV shows. I mean, you turn on Israeli television, it's CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, right? So when you tell Israelis and you paint for them a picture, listen, we don't need Australia, Canada, the US, Europe, France, the UK. They're like, what are you talking? That's not who we are. We're a liberal democracy that wants to be part of the Western world, even though we live in a region that is not. And by the way, it's a strength and it's a weakness, because the weakness is we thought we were Luxembourg, but we forgot that our neighbors are not Belgium and France. Our neighbors are, Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been trying to articulate, and it's a tricky thing to articulate without being misunderstood, just to expand on the point that I was making earlier, is there's a certain amount of misbehavior that Israel can get away with, and it can expect that the Jews of the world will make excuses for it, right? But there comes a point, and by that I mean the pre-October 7th Netanyahu paradigm of continue aggressively building Israeli, Jewish towns in the West Bank, make life increasingly difficult and humiliating and degrading for Palestinians in the West Bank, be as capricious as you want to about the way that the embargo in Gaza works and micromanaging precisely how many kilometers off the coast Gazan fishermen can fish and precisely how many, dual-use items that could potentially be military in purpose but are really probably just concrete or whatever. There was a whole list of things that people who felt like Israel was behaving poorly in the Netanyahu years could list, that the Jews of the world were able to go, yeah, we don't like this government, but, give them a pass, stop singling them out. We have to focus on solidarity and opposing anti-Semitism. And what's happened in the past couple of years is that there's a tipping point at which people like me are trying to say we have to be able to articulate Jewishness in the absence of being expected to defend Israel, and that contrary to it being an instigator of anti-Semitism for there to be division in the Jewish community over Israel, it may actually make may make the Jews of the world safer for them to be understood as a complicated, quarreling, rambunctious minority who disagree with each other about Israel than for every Jew to be perceived as synonymous with the IDF. But I don't know how you pull off that move of distancing oneself from the state as it currently exists, not the Zionism in the clouds that my grandmother dreamed of, not the concept of an Israeli state, this actual state, the way that it actually behaves, the policies it actually pursues, not just for a year, not just for a decade, but for quite a long time, since at least, say, 2008. How do you pull off that move? Or should you, or is it a misbegotten move? Am I on the wrong side of this and I should just shut up and carry water for Israel?
No, look, I can't speak for how, people around the world perceive Jews, right? I mean, I think we know, and I spend a lot of time outside of this country, and we see, what happens in this immediate perception. Oh, if you're Jewish, that means you're Zionist. That means you're pro Netanyahu. You're pro Likud. That means you support the war. You support settlements, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, that's not true at all. I mean, by the way, I think the best proof of that, and maybe what can serve as legs for what you're trying to articulate, is how we are here in Israel, the Israeli people, right? I mean, the vast majority right now of Israeli people do not support this government, right? The majority of Israeli people do not support Netanyahu. The majority of Israeli people do not support the continuation of this war, right? The majority of Israeli people want this Trump plan to succeed. And even a Trump plan that, by the way, envisions a Palestinian state one day. God forbid we should mention that word, right? I mean, so if you look at where the majority of Israeli people are, they're kind of where you are to an extent, right? Now, they might not have that same level of criticism for the IDF. That's where I think we'll find some nuance. But at the end of the day, the vision of what you want to see Israel be from the perch of the diaspora is the kind of Israel that I think Israelis actually do want to see. Now, the change that has happened here, and we can't ignore, there has been a change since October 7th. October 7th has taught Israelis, and it's going to be tough to overcome this right now, is that maybe this idea of, helping our enemies and our adversaries create economic prosperity and trying to stave off conflict and doing anything we can to kick the can down the road and not to have to fight this war, that's not working. The idea of withdrawing from territory, look at what happened when we withdrew from Lebanon in 2000 after an 18-year presence in a security zone there. We got the 2006 Second Lebanon War, and look what happened in 2023 when they unleashed 100 and something thousand missiles that they had on us from Hezbollah. Never fired all of them, but that was the arsenal. We pulled out of Gaza in 2005, and look what happened in 2023, almost 20 years later. We got the October 7th attack. So tell Israelis today, listen, Palestinian state is where we need to go. It's tough for people to see that. Personally, I think that needs to remain the objective, but we need to explain what the process is to get there. And it's going to take time, right? But there's nothing wrong with, even if we had a responsible government, which unfortunately we don't. And I think you've gotten my sense of where I stand on this government. I would want my government to say, listen, of course I want the Palestinians to have self-determination. I want them to have a state. Part of defeating Hamas is leading to the establishment of a Palestinian state. We're going to help. We're going to remove Hamas. We're going to help create that new entity. We're going to let them stand on their own. We're going to work with them in the world to de-radicalize Gaza, change the education system, change the cultural institutions. We got this. There's a generation there that wants to kill me. We need a new generation to come that can understand coexistence. We need to undergo a change in our own society, in the way we view the Palestinians and the Arabs. But we're going on that. And unfortunately, we don't hear any of that. But I think that most Israelis are there, but the trauma right now is clouding that. So the one thing I can ask of you, Josh, don't give up on us just yet, right? Give us a little time. Wait for this war to end, and hopefully, please God, it will soon. Wait for this war to end, and let's get into that day after period. That
so,
reconstruction.
The reason it sounds false, Yaakov, is not your words, but the idea of a Palestinian state being in any way plausible is that what we've needed for a long time are green shoots of civic institutions in Palestine, right? We need an alternative. As you say, the education system has been shot. You've got a whole generation of people who are wildly anti-Semitic. In the West Bank, you've got this moribund, corrupt governing authority. You got jihadists in Gaza. It's a basket case. And the reaction that the world has seen Israel take ever since, well, for the past 15 or 20 years, has been to continue building what many people regard as illegal Jewish settlements in the West Bank, to continue turning something of a blind eye to clashes between Jews, between newly arrived Jews and local Palestinians in those areas, to build highways exclusively for Jews across the West Bank that are nice and fast while Palestinians go bumbling over these little potholed roads, and constructing a militarized thicket that looks like apartheid to the untrained eye in the West Bank, at the same time as all of those indignities that I was talking about of the blockade on Gaza earlier, micromanaging precisely, how many calories go in, and it smells off. And there are a million reasons why Israel would feel justified in having run that regime. So let's ignore the Gaza War on October 7th and just talk about the delicate relationship that the world has had with Israel's behavior even prior to that. I think it was Ta-Nehisi Coates who made the point that he opposes the death penalty regardless of the conditions. It's no use to come to him and say, yeah, but what if there was a person what if it was a terror? What if it was a jihadist terrorist, who had killed thousands of people? What about the death penalty then? He would just say, no, I just oppose the death penalty. And similarly, he opposes apartheid. He opposes a regime that treats certain people one way and other people one way based on a risk assessment that is purely adjudicated because of their ethnicity. But that is life in the West Bank, right? Like, where does Israel get? It's not just a Gaza War thing. It's not just a post October 7th thing. It's like you can give me a million reasons why a person is justified at every step of the way in making logical decisions. But at the end of the day, there's been a lot more behaving like a brutalizing hegemon who has dominion over another people than there has been tending to the green shoots in those societies. Like, stopping building settlements and investing in local Palestinian community centers that can, with funding for more moderate versions of Islam or something like that. Like, if Israel had been doing that for decades, it would have more, credibility now to come forth and say, look, stay with us, don't give up on us just yet. But where's the evidence that it's really genuinely concerned with providing the conditions on the ground in the West Bank or Gaza that can give rise to functioning societies?
Now I know why they call this the uncomfortable conversations. I can't say you're 100% wrong. And I think that part of what you're saying is right. And one of my biggest problems that I've long written about and continue to write about, even this week, I wrote about it in my column, is just this failure that we have as a country to make tough decisions over time, right? What do we, you look throughout the history of the conflict with the Palestinians, at least in the modern iteration of the last 35 years or so, since the Oslo Accords, pretty much, since 1993 when they were signed. And you say to yourself, okay, at one point, Israel embraced this idea of two separate entities, us as one state, the Palestinians as another state. Now, it ran into problems, right? There were the suicide attacks of the 90s, and there were the second intifada of 2000. But then suddenly in 2005, Israel goes and says, look, we're pulling out of Gaza. We're going to, we're making these steps now again to try to get back on track. But ever since then, it's been as if we have no initiative of our own, right? You don't know what is the Benjamin Netanyahu plan, right? I have no clue. I do know what was the Bush plan. I know what the Obama plan was. I know what the Trump plan was. I know what the Biden plan was. Every president has a plan, but there's no Benjamin Netanyahu plan. What does Israeli want? What does if you told me right now that Israelis want one state, I would be against it. I think it's the end of Israel, in my opinion, ultimately, definitely demographically. But if that's what they want, go for it, guys. You have the votes in the Knesset. And then annex the West Bank, apply Israeli law to the West Bank. don't do apartheid, right? So you're gonna have to give citizenship to everyone, including the Palestinians. I think that's stupid. But if you want to go ahead and do it, go for it. And if you don't want to do that, you want the two-state solution, then what are we doing to make that happen? I don't think we should be giving them a state today, but we should be doing a lot of what you're saying. Invest in that. Say, hold on, is another outpost and another hilltop somewhere in the West Bank, that's what's going to make Israel more safer and secure? Or is it, let's leave the situation as it is, right? We don't need to create more, but we're not moving anyone out of their homes right now. But let's start investing in creating the reality on the ground that can one day facilitate and sustain potential coexistence. Why aren't we doing that? So what are we doing instead? And we've been doing this for 20 years, Josh. We fell in love with the status quo, right? I mean, and I don't know about you, I'm married, right? I think you're married, right? Yeah. I mean, you got a couple kids. Status quo doesn't work in a relationship. I mean, if I told my wife we're keeping a status quo, I'm out of the house. I mean, I think in any relationship, there's no such thing as a status quo, and just assuming that the situation can stay the way it is, and you're going to keep on building in the settlements, and you're not going to invest in the West, in the Palestinians, and you're not. I'll tell you something even more absurd. Really, it's just crazy when you think about it. Go back to when we started facilitating the transfer of the money from Qatar to Hamas in Gaza, 2018. Okay, around that same time. Couple years before, right around that same time, Israel lobbied hard. The pro-Israel community in the United States lobbied hard to pass a law called the Taylor Force Act. Taylor Force was a U.S. Army Ranger or Marine who was stabbed to death on the Tel Aviv promenade by a Palestinian terrorist. And in his name, they passed a law in the U.S. Congress that essentially deducted from American aid to the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. So the so-called good guys in the Palestinian, the ones who are against terror, deducted aid based on they have this pay-to-slay mechanism, right? They pay terrorists in Israeli prisons, which is bad and horrible and shouldn't happen because it incentivizes, it rewards terrorists essentially. But they're officially against terrorism. They don't support terrorism. Their security forces coordinate and cooperate with the Israeli security forces in the West Bank to stop terrorism. But they have this thing that they pay. Very bad. Shouldn't happen. But America, we got them, together with the pro-Israel community in America, passed that law to deduct whatever it is, $100 million. They deduct the $100 million. At the same time, we're asking Qatar to transfer $30 million every month to the genocidal jihadist terrorist group in Gaza. So in other words, we're giving money to the guys who want to kill us, and we're asking America to take away money from the guys who are officially against killing us. How does that make sense?
And is the rationale that if you placate Hamas and just keep things humming along and nobody's starving in Gaza, that they'll just keep quiet in perpetuity?
No, that's for sure what we were trying to do in Gaza. But my point is, in the West Bank, what were we trying to? We kept on trying to eviscerate and weaken and I don't not topple, because we never wanted to bring down the Palestinian Authority, because it was convenient for us that they're there in that way, very weakened and isolated. No one gives a shit about them, and they don't have money. But is that in our interest? Our interest has to be something else, and we don't have any. We've lost the leadership that we once had in this country.
Yeah, I mean, this comes back to sort of the subtext of your book, or even indeed the text of your book, which is about a lack of vision and a lack of sort of thought, really, a lack of strategic thinking that gave rise to the holes that allowed Israel to be attacked on October 7th. And it almost sounds like you're giving too much of the benefit of the doubt to Israel's recent leaders in saying, like, why were they being so... what was their ultimate objective? Couldn't they see that it was going to be fruitless to be undermining the Palestinian Authority at the same time as they were bolstering Hamas?
No, I by the way, sorry to interrupt. I know what Netanyahu wanted to do. Netanyahu is ideologically opposed to the establishment of a Palestinian state.
Right.
He has tried to fool the world over a period of decades by giving speeches occasionally saying, yeah, this is where I want to go, a demilitarized Palestinian state. Not true. He is officially, ideologically, in his bones, against it. And for that reason, to give the money to Hamas and to take away the money from the Palestinian Authority and not to talk to Abu Mazen in the West Bank, the leader of the PA, was all about helping to continue the divide between the Palestinians to achieve that political objective. Because then when you would come to Israel and say, hey, Israelis, why aren't you doing anything for the Palestinian? Why aren't you trying to work and facilitate and
we have no partner for peace.
Exactly. And they're divided. They don't even get along. So what do you want from me?
Yeah.
Right? It was the perfect excuse.
It's made it so hard, Yaakov, for Israel to have credibility out, in the rest of the world. So much more difficult. All of this behavior. It's infuriating, to someone who cares about about the country and who cares about trying to find peace there, that level of blinkeredness is so evident. These strategies that aren't strategies, these tactics that aren't really tactics, these sort of short-term, buy ourselves another year of peace and quiet and hope that we can divide the enemy for another few months or few years. Like, what is I guess it is just a deeply cynical and pessimistic view of the long-term prospects for peace, right? It is. Look, I interviewed your former boss, Naftali Bennett, in New York when I was working there, and I was somewhat refreshed by the stridency, like the blatancy with which he sort of just discounted the possibility of there ever being a Palestinian state. He was like, we sat together for a half hour, and he just seemed quite matter of fact about it. This would have been in 2015, maybe. So he was just like, he was just treated as if it's not a big deal. You deal, you manage it. It's just an issue that you will manage. And I never saw it that way. I always saw it as something, and the world doesn't see it that way. It speaks to people, as you said. You go all over the world, and now in particular, you see people agitating about Palestinian rights in a way that they weren't 2 years ago. And I think that is partly because everybody has a latent sense that Zionist or not Zionist, anti-Semite or Jew, there has to be some final way of solving the problem of there being two people who have competing claims to some of this land.
I mean, I agree with you.
So tell me what it is, and then we'll wrap up the conversation.
Listen, I wish there was a way that we could say what that plan is and how do we get there. I think that October 7th, in a tragic way, but in the reality, is a step potentially in that direction, because the removal of Hamas, its elimination to the greatest extent possible, the establishment. In other words, if you look at the Trump plan that has apparently the support of the Arab countries, and Israel has said we agree to it, what it essentially does is it creates a new reality in Gaza, new governance in Gaza, a new entity. It frees the Palestinians of Gaza. It gives them hope. And it should give all of us hope that we can create this reality that is what's needed. I mean, Israel really is that country, I think. And this is the pain of October 7th to some extent. One side of it is the book that we wrote, right, which is the failures that led to it. But the flip side of October 7th, the other side of the coin, is the re-engineering of the Middle East today, right? If you think about it for a moment right now, there is amazing opportunity today in the Middle East. You have Hezbollah beaten back in Lebanon, not gone, but beaten back. You have a government in Lebanon that's actively trying to collect the weapons and stop Hezbollah. You got a new government in Syria that, they were Al-Qaeda just a few months ago, but maybe they're now the darling of the West. Ashara, the leader of Syria, now talks about a potential agreement with Israel. You got Iran on the defensive after the historic Israeli-American attack, the potential for a new nuclear deal that will hopefully prevent them from ever getting a nuclear weapon. You have Gaza now, Hamas gone, degraded, whatever, and the opportunity for a new government that can prevent them from reconstituting and can lead us to a new era with the Palestinians. There is we're on the cusp of amazing opportunity. But you know what the problem is? I think, at least in Israel, we don't have the right government to take advantage of these opportunities. We need a government here that can see the opportunity and seize it. Now, I know, because I say this to Israelis, and they think I'm naive. They say, what do you mean? The lesson of October 7th is not to seize opportunities, hunker down, build bigger fences. Always not have a weapon in one hand and a hand and a pen, or a hand stretched out in peace in the other. Have two weapons in both hands, right? I think that I get that. That's the trauma speaking. But for a country, we can't ignore the opportunities that we have. We have to hold a weapon in one hand, and we have to always be prepared. That is the lesson of October 7th. The lesson is, don't let your enemies amass weapons. Don't let them build up those capabilities on your border and you think it's going to be okay. I can buy them off. No. We see them building up the capabilities. You attack. You don't wait. And that's going to be hard, but you're going to have to do it. But on the other hand, we have to take advantage of this. I mean, the Middle East can be something else. And you know what? If the answer to October 7th, I think, by the way, the answer to October 7th, unlike Smotrich and Ben Gvir, it's not resettling Gaza. That's stupid. The answer to October 7th, the real victory for Israel, is normalization with Saudi Arabia. If you do something like that, you show everyone, Yahya Sinwar, we spoke about before what he wanted to achieve. If you do that, it will show him and everyone else that they completely failed. That this is actually, Israel has been able, and the region together have been able to take this tragedy and turn it around to a new reality that is for the benefit of the entire region, and I would say the wider world. That's the victory we can get there. But we need leadership.
Speaking of that leadership, often it's unlikely people who bring peace or who have the credibility to do more audacious things. I'm thinking of Sharon having the credibility to pull out of Gaza, for example. Do you think that it's possible or even likely that a right-wing Israeli prime minister who's not Netanyahu could be the person who actually ends up creating a Palestinian state?
It's possible. It's hard to see who that is right now.
Well, could it be Bennett?
I mean, it could be Bennett. Bennett is still vocally very much opposed to a Palestinian state, but I think that a Bennett-led government could be a government that takes Israel on that journey, and is a government that could come if it's elected after whenever elections will be held. They're supposed to be in October, but they're expected to be held earlier. When those elections are held, if there is a government that's led by Naftali Bennett or anyone else from that center left camp, I think that they would have the credibility to, and potentially the support of the people, because on the one hand, they're right wing, some of them, Bennett, Lieberman, some of these other people.
When you say center-left camp, what do you mean? I found Naftali Bennett to be more right.
Well, Naftali Bennett is on the right. Right, Naftali Bennett is on the right.
Oh, I see. You were talking about a different camp.
No, but in the anti-Netanyahu camp, let's call it for a moment.
Oh, I see. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, you have
the opposition.
Yes, the opposition. Thank you. You have a mix of Naftali Bennett on the right and Avigdor Lieberman, who's a little more centrist, but also right-wing. But then you have Lapid, Gantz, Eisenkot, Yair Golan, names that not everyone might know, who are more on the left. So it's a bit of a smorgasbord of different leaders that kind of ranges from the right to the left, but it's more center and it does lean a bit more to the left. But it makes no difference. I think the vast majority of Israelis are there, right? They are there. And I think that they are the Israelis who we also have to remember. They're the Israelis who are serving. They're the Israelis who are working. Netanyahu's coalition today is made up of the ultra-Orthodox who don't serve and don't work, right? They aren't the backbone of this country. The backbone of this country are those people. And if those people, if they can form that government, if they can win that election, I think we can put out a vision that takes us in that direction. And hopefully, I hope and pray that that's possible. Because if we miss this opportunity, it could lead us to crying for generations, I think.
It is such a hope of mine that the people who've spent the past 2 years posting videos on Instagram about how if you're morally enlightened, then you have to be an anti-Zionist at this point because look at all the dead Gazan babies, that they end up realizing that they were on the wrong side of a Palestinian state and on the wrong side of the best interests of the Palestinian people and on the wrong side of what ended up being a better and more peaceful Middle East. So I thank you for, it's rare that I go into a conversation about this particular topic with someone in Israel expecting to end on a sunny note, but you did it. It's actually optimistic. Maybe we'll get there. Yaakov, it's lovely to meet you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Josh. Great to be with you.